In an era of live-in relationships and situationships, sex for many possibly may be easier to access beyond the framework of marriage. But the new Bhartiya Nyaya Sanhita has the young and the young at heart, both concerned. Section 69 of the new law is about sexual intercourse through deceit. Section 69 of the Bhartiya Nyaya Sanhita states that if a promise to marry is made without any intent to follow it up and a sexual relationship is established, a person can face up to 10 years of imprisonment. What is deceitful sex? This involves consensual sex under misleading promises, involves deceptive statements about marriage, false promises of employment or promotion, marrying while suppressing one's true identity, and sex by concealing relevant facts. Criminalizing sex on the false promise of marriage is not new. The courts in India have interpreted such cases as rape for years, relying on sections 375 and 90 of the existing IPC. I won't get into this in detail because now this stands scrapped. But I'll give you examples of orders from the Supreme Court. In August 2022, Supreme Court stated consensual sex on genuine promise of marriage is not rape. In January 2024, it stated offense of rape if false promise was made from inception. And in January 2023, it has said every breach of promise to marry is not rape, with specific focus on intent from the beginning. With the proposed clause 69, though a section of experts claim consensual sex can be framed as rape if a man does not carry out his promise to marry the woman. There's another element to this. Indian courts so far have distinguished between cases where the promise to marry was false from the beginning and a breach of promise where the man intended to marry the woman but could not do so for legitimate reasons, quote unquote. Does this now change? There's one side that argues that this new provision is much needed, as such cases were open to interpretation earlier. But there are others who argue this will lead to unfair targeting and arrests of men, which is now easier without credible evidence. That's what they claim. There are also those who argue that the new law is a political tool to criminalize, quote unquote, love jihad, a term which, by the meaning of it itself, is negated by some. Essentially meaning it could target people from one group. We'll try and understand what the reality of all of this is. I'm being joined by Deepika Narayan Bhardwaj, who's an activist and documentary filmmaker, Talish Ray, who's an advocate, Tehseen Poonawala, who's a political analyst, and Kapil Madan, who's advocate and a political analyst as well. Thank you very much, all of you, for joining us. Let me first go to you, Talish Ray. How do you look at this particular law? There's been a lot of discourse around it. There's been a lot of concerns around it, political concerns as well. But today we are looking at this particular section. Now, how do you look at this from the framework of gender, particularly where false claims of promises or other false claims could be made? Many arguing that this is to protect women, others saying this is being unfair to men. How would you see this?
So when I look at this, there are a couple of elements which you had already covered earlier. The fact that, we already had the Supreme Court reading into Section 375 as well as Section 90 of the IPC. But perhaps one of the most notable things was that of late, the Honorable Supreme Court had looked into it with deep depth and created a sort of boundary framework in order to recognize what is the consent of the woman within this framework. Now, what it actually, on a bare reading of this section, when I look at it, there are two parts that stand out. One, Chapter 5 itself, under which the section is given, which clubs again women and children together. Please understand that you and I are women of agency, and to club us with a child who's a minor, whose agency itself is doubtful under law, except under certain circumstances, is in its own self very demeaning towards the gender of those that identify with the gender of women. That's number one. Number two, when I look at it, there is the second part where at no point in time does Section 69 mention the consent of the woman itself within it. So here we are talking about whoever by deceitful means. And deceitful means, when I look at what the definition explanation that is given, talks about inducement for or false promise of employment or promotion. That itself comes within sexual harassment laws and norms within and judgments within this country, but also about suppressing identity, which is far greater than just looking at a particular religion or identity in terms of how the courts will read into identity, but caste identities also play a very important part. So in all that we see is that when we look at this section, beyond the fact that when we look at whether how the use or the misuse of it would come in from the gender perspective, what I see is that the agency of women itself has been completely disregarded. I'm not even saying that this agency currently is breached. It's just nowhere visible. There is no term that is used in terms of what may be the consent of a woman. So therefore, when we look at sexual intercourse based on false promise, we are looking at and we're not even looking at whether the intentions were there from the start or towards the end. It just says that it doesn't amount to rape, but it shall be punished for a very severe period of time, as well as with a fine. So when we see how this section is rolling out, it's actually 3 steps backwards from what the courts had moved, what the Justice Verma committee had recommended. I don't know which way it is going to play out when it does play out, and in terms of how it will play out where women have consented to relationships that would involve a sexual relationship which may or may not amount to marriage, which may be outside the dimensions of their society, of their caste, of their religion, and in what way it is going to play out, especially when we look at the other codes that have come into being, which also talk about the greater power that has been given to the police in terms of looking at the FIR. So those are the couple of problematic things that actually blatantly stand out on a bare reading of the Act.
Kapil Madan, if I can come to you. Kapil Madan, do you agree with what Talish Ray is saying? Also, could you explain to our viewers what changes vis-a-vis what's currently before the courts, how the courts are looking at it, vis-a-vis the new laws? Very simply put, how should the viewers be looking at this? Could you explain this very simply?
Yes. If you look at the previous, definition of rape, I mean, promise to marry was not defined under the IPC. How this offense came into being was the court was to construe if, the physical relationship have happened without consent, and if the consent was given any kind of a misconception. So when we talk about misconception, that's where the issue of promise to marry, used to kick in. It was to be interpreted that a person goes to a lady, he makes a promise, and he knowingly makes a false promise, and on that basis there was physical relationship, and the guy never intended to marry, and therefore it used to be an offense. Now what has happened under the new law, the parliament has now codified and has expressly made this as an offense under section 69. So I have two, broad issue, which I will highlight. One, to my understanding, it looks like, manifestly arbitrary, because here, it, applies only in one direction. It is only a woman who can, invoke 69, because the term used in 69 is not rape. It is, sexual intercourse. Now, if you reverse this situation, if the woman enters, makes a promise of, marriage, and therefore thereafter, there is a physical relationship between, the boy and the girl, and later the girl recile.
You mean a man makes a promise of marriage? Woman.
Yes.
I see. Okay.
It looks like, because the term uses 69 is not rape. The term used in the new laws is sexual intercourse. So if you look at it from this perspective, it looks like manifestly arbitrary, because it to my understanding, there's an issue of Article 14. My second point is that it is always very difficult to conclusively say, when we talk about, whether the person actually intended in a relationship or whether he made a false promise. It is very, very subjective. Now, what has happened in this case is that
That's the point of
the
intent.
law now
Yeah.
prescribes that it will have and carry a punishment up to 10 years. The moment you take an offense and you prescribe a punishment above 7 years, then the issue of liberty also kicks in, because the law as it stands now, it says if the offense is punishable with up to 7 years, there cannot be mechanical arrest in that case. The moment you have provided a punishment
Okay,
which is more than
okay.
7 years,
Kapil,
then you
I'll come back to you, Kapil. There are so many nuances to this, but also let me just get the introductory remarks from other panelists as well. Tehseen Poonawalla, to you. Tehseen, you have the question of intent, and Kapil Madan spent a little time on that, but there's also this whole question of a political rhetoric around it. I don't know whether this is political rhetoric, but it's also being said that this is a political tool to target people of a particular group, particularly to back what is otherwise being carved out as love jihad. How much of that would you agree with?
So first of all, I'm extremely happy, Sneha, to be with my friend Deepika on the show. And I have to tell all the viewers of Mirror now that the kind of work Deepika does is commendable. She is somebody I actually look up to. So I'm so happy that she's here. And I was actually thinking about her and manifesting here, and she turned up on the show. So I'm so happy. But look, here are two or three things. One is love jihad, that's one part. But also caste equations. It could be used against it. What you have is
How?
you have, because somebody's a caste, somebody's another caste. You will have the moral police, the caste groups, the
So how
religious
would this not
groups,
be
and the
before?
police in your bedroom. Because it wasn't criminalized for consensual sex. The police were required to protect the girl and the guy. Now the police is in your bedroom. Sorry, let me rephrase this. The police is in your bed. It's as clear as that.
Right.
Okay, and let me be very blunt. What happens in the case of a one-night stand? So you meet somebody at a bar, you hook up. Now the girl realizes she wants to file a complaint. What happens there? Suddenly she says it's her word versus his. Look, he promised me marriage at the bar. How are you going to prove it? It's intent. Couple's right. What happens if the guy is completely in love with the girl and the girl's promised him marriage and she walks up for whatever reason? No criminality there. So the girl can walk out. What happens in cases of you've hooked up, you're having a casual relationship, suddenly one of the couple, in this case, because this is so anti-men in this stage, the girl's in love with the guy, but the guy says, look, we were just hooking up. What happens in that case? Now he's a criminal. Look, I'm being so explicit because we are living in a real world.
Sure.
This has been framed by perhaps police officers who have no clue of how the real world works. So you are now criminalizing an entire generation of young men for consensual relationships. Sure enough, if there's cheating or deceit or pregnancy or leaving the women, those have already been covered under DVA Act, Domestic Violence Act. They've already covered. Suppose you beat up the woman, you've cheated her, you false identity.
But
Those
how
were
could
already
you- no, no,
covered.
how could that be
Now,
covered under domestic act?
They were covered under various sections, including 420. So say I've given a wrong name, or XYZ's given a wrong name to a girl and hooked up. Those were already covered under 420 and various other sections. Those already existed. So the girl could go, look, I thought I was in a relationship with XYZ. Turns out he's ABC. He's completely cheated me, did deceit. Those laws already existed. Say in that live-in relationship, there was violence. That was covered under DVA. The woman got pregnant. The Supreme Court came down and said, no, she'll be allowed certain rights. Those were already covered. So you've given no additional protection. What you've actually done is now you're going to turn an entire bunch of young men into criminals. What happens if one is a jilted lover? So you have not thought this through in a society where young people are increasingly going to seek freedoms, including sexual freedoms. Unless we want to be a repressed society, and I'm okay with that, and you want to turn out. Now, there's one more thing. Why sex? So physical relationship is criminalized. Fair enough. What about if it's a mental trauma? What if the girl's going through mental trauma? So the guy's promised her marriage, they've not had sex, and look, he's broken up with her, and she's going to mental emotional trauma. So no, suddenly sex and physical relationship is the bad word because hey, women cannot be in a relationship.
No,
you see the state trying to protect you,
Yeah.
and therefore the policeman in your bedroom. That is appalling. And I'm not accepting one night stands. I don't think it's cool. I'm just saying that this is the real world.
it's a reality.
I'm not yeah.
In fact, I do want to talk about what seems to be an imposed sense of chastity by the state, and I'll go to Talish in a bit for that. But before that, we have Deepika Bhardwaj as well, who's been very patiently waiting. Deepika, you have, of course, spoken a lot about this. You have raised a lot of concerns about this. Even in the earlier system, you had raised concerns, but there are many who are saying that, listen, in what seems to be an attempt to protect women, you are making another set of gender very vulnerable. While that may be one question, there's also another question I want to ask. This new set of laws actually claim to be gender neutral. Do you really see that through in this section? Deepika.
Hi, Sneha. Thank you for inviting me. First of all, nothing about Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita is gender neutral. All the laws that were gender specific, including 498A or the other IPC sections involving sexual crimes or molestation, stalking, etc., remain to be gender specific, only applicable to women. But if I would say so, the most horrendous and the most scary of all is Section 69, Sneha. I would like to begin my argument by a judgment today by the Punjab and Haryana High Court, which has quashed a case of rape on false promise of marriage filed by a 51-year-old married woman having children who was in a 5.5-year long relationship with a 50-year-old CRPF officer. The Punjab and Haryana High Court said that circumstances, age, and everything has to be looked into. But let's understand that this man was called a rapist, and then he had to go all the way to the High Court to get this case quashed. His job is at stake, his liberties must have been at stake. Probably he was arrested, and today the case has been quashed by the court, but no punishment to the woman. Sneha, there have been cases of rape on false promise of marriage where an adult woman above 40 has alleged that she was given false promise of marriage for the last 15 years, 20 years, 25 years. It has been absolute crazy implementation of laws in the last couple of years, Sneha. And I will tell you the most shocking part of it, and I'm personally helping these victims every single day. In Gurgaon, a girl filed 9 rape cases on 9 different men within just 1 year, claiming all of them gave her false promise of marriage. In Jabalpur, a 35-year-old woman filed 7 such rape cases, saying all of these men gave her false promise of marriage. Recently in Jaipur, we got a woman arrested. She had filed 14 rape cases claiming false promise of marriage. It's absolutely obnoxious and beyond any human understanding on how you can give so much power to a person just on the basis of gender. Whatever the woman says would be considered as gospel truth. This case, like Kapil said, the section has punishment over 7 years, so there would be immediate arrest. The worst and what is going to be manifesting, Sneha, I don't know how it's going to be. I just feel so scared. There are cases where the man has not even seen the woman who has accused him of rape. And now, with Section 69, they are saying you can give a woman promotion ka jhansa, you can give a woman job ka jhansa, and then if you do not give the job or promotion, then basically you're going to be sent for 10 years.
Right.
What are they even talking about? Is sex a barter now for women to get a job or a promotion? And if it doesn't happen, then she sends the man to jail. This law needs to be scrapped.
Okay.
Completely.
No, Deepika, you've made an important point, and let me just go to Tehseen, because Tehseen said that he wants to leave at 10:30. He has another place to go to. So before I come to you, and it's going to be Talish Ray next, but Tehseen, if I can ask you this question about, it's not just a false promise of marriage. You have employment, you have promotion. Now, there would be others who would argue, if there is sex involved for the promise of promotion or for employment, it is a case of mutual benefit.
So I don't want to say mutual benefit, but I don't think women sleep around for getting promoted, right? So I don't think women do that.
So you're saying essentially this law means one-sided.
It's one-sided. Now, as an entrepreneur,
that women do that and men
it's
can
actually
get away
putting
with
women
that.
down. So can I be absolutely blunt? It's shaming all women. Why? Women don't do that. I mean, you're a very successful woman, and you don't do that. Women don't do that. And if there is a consensual relationship, and if somebody is misusing the consensual relationship, sure, there will be power equations. I'm not denying it. Sure, there are men, there are perverts everywhere. Sure, there are powerful men. But how do you prove intent? Number one. Number two, what's going to happen is, I think a lot of companies, women hiring is going to be looked at, how do you hire women? Because there will be women who misuse this and say it's at the pretext of a promotion. I was asked or proposed to sleep with somebody. How do you prove that? How do you prove that? Now, how do you actually prove a consensual sex has taken place? Because unlike rape, where there could be some marks, if it's consensual, how do you prove that? What is the proof of it? So how it's one person's word against another. Now let's go even worse. And I've seen two cases. I think Deepika handled one of those cases where the girls actually not even met the guy. And there's a case of he slept with me. Now later on you get that proof through the mobile locations, etc. But till that point, you're presumed guilty until you prove yourself innocent. So all of this is not thought through. So if the woman says that, look, he's promised me a promotion, hence he slept with me, and what if the guy's not even done that? And now you go through an entire trial only to prove it happened or did not happen. Or if it was consensual, how does that work? So none of this is logically thought through. I don't deny women at workplace have to be protected. They must be protected. There are perverts out there. There are men who indulge in power play. Of course that has to happen. But that can't, but how do you draw that line with consensual sex? So that is something that hasn't been thought through. Or how do you protect the man who hasn't done it?
Okay, Tehseen, we would love to have you stay over, but if you have
I'll
to
stay
leave...
for 5, yeah.
Okay, so Talish Ray, let me come to you at this point. Talish, how do you respond to what Deepika and Tehseen have said? Because, you know, for ordinary people, young people who would be watching, who are discussing all this, these are questions that they are raising. Is it as blind-sighted as it seems to be made out? Or is a larger point being missed?
So I think my colleague at the bar, Mr. Madan, has already pointed his finger. So I think he wants to come in here. Mr. Madan, would you like to come in, or should I handle this one?
I'll just
Yes,
make a
Mr.
very small yet and a very pertinent point here. What I feel is it would have been much better if you would have made this offense as a non-cognizable offense, to say a separate category offense wherein police does not have any role. I mean, if the woman had been cheated, if there was a false promise,
How would that happen?
okay, that needs to be that needs to be tried, but you know, uh, 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 involving the police out
do you
of
try it?
from category of these kind of offenses would have made a lot more sense.
So I'm going to
I
come.
don't think
I'm,
it's
I'm going to.
possible, Madan. I don't think
I'm
in
going to
India
come back
yet it is
in,
possible.
Sneha, to sort of address. There are two parts to this. Now, one part being about the deceitful means or making by promise to marry a woman without the intention of fulfilling the same. And deceitful means, again, is divided into two parts. One is the inducement for or false promise of employment or promotion. Now, what I would like to point out here is that it has been one of the earliest principles that has been recognized under sexual harassment, and goes back to the US case, which is sort of a mother judgment which defined it, which is Meritor Saving Bank judgment, which talked about quid pro quo. Quid pro quo being you do something for something, where consent itself, if there's a power hierarchy, where a person is
Absolutely.
within their
That's right.
means to make a difference, right? And there is that power hierarchy, and there is a sexual equation that comes into that play. That itself comes under sexual harassment at workplace for women. And that has been put in so far as the 2013 laws go, as well under the recommendation of the Justice Verma Committee. Now, so far as that is concerned, that is not something that is a blind side. That's already the law. It is only being repeated here with a much further deeper punishment of 10 years, which I think becomes very problematic, because you also have the entire thing about how do you protect then the safety of the victim that's concerned. The second part, of course, is about marrying by suppressing of identity, or with the promise to marry a woman without the intention of fulfilling the same. Now, this again gets subdivided into various categories about, do we look at the consent of the woman here? What exactly is the meaning of suppressing of identity? What exactly comprises of, when you look at the identity criteria, what are we looking at? Are we looking at identity from a region? Are we looking at caste? Are we looking at religion? And where does it come in terms of the agency of the woman itself? So in that part of the section, I definitely think that it has not been thought through. Where it is talking about where the promise of employment is concerned, I think somebody just went a little overboard there, so that there needs to be a boundary that is defined. And in the course of the law being implemented, it is going to cause a fair bit of chaos and confusion. I think one of the things that most sides are united for, whether it is those that are standing up for not all men hashtag sort of a thing, or those that stand for the agency of women. The biggest problem being that when you look at it from all sides, this is one section that has become controversial, given that it does not recognize the reality of what exists today, at least in urban India, and also a milieu of India which is fairly well aware, where the sexual norms are not the same as that of a time when Macaulay sort of put forward the Indian Penal Code. So that's all that I have to sort of put across on this. I'm not going to get into the cases that are coming in, because please look at the fact that these are cases that have been quashed, that when we look at where the Supreme Court is concerned, I think what the other panelists are also referring to is the pain of the process. And that process, by the way, has not been eased out by the other laws that have come in.
So you are also essentially saying speedy justice is not really, again, the spirit that's been reflected in this particular section. I mean, you know, a lot has been spared about the new laws, the heart of the new laws being speedy justice. You are essentially saying that's not visible.
No, because then you have to look at the procedural side of it. And when you look at the procedural side of how the police powers come in, especially when you're looking at the punishment, which says that it may be imprisonment of either description for a term that may extend to 10 years. That's a fairly long, duration.
Okay.
And up
And
to
you,
10 years means that the police powers actually
do you want to
differ.
spend on what many have said? How do you look at this? Many have claimed that this is state imposing what is otherwise a patriarchal notion of chastity. Would you concur with that, or would you disagree with that?
I would say that this is the state getting into the agency of the consensual part for any gender vis-a-vis how they deal with their sexual interactions with each other. So I would not use a strong term such as chastity, because I think that itself has no meaning when we look at gender today. But I would say that yes, there is the intent of the state to be able to codify what should have been that of choice with certain safeguards to whichever is a gender which may not have its right or its voice being heard.
Deepika, and I know outrightly you would even rubbish this question, but nonetheless, how do you really look at the fact that there are many who have argued that in safe spaces, what should be safe spaces for all genders, whether it be your workspace or whether it be your domestic space, as it were, isn't safe for either gender? Are you then saying that this law completely fails from the prism of whether it be a woman or a man?
I'm sorry,
Or,
I couldn't get
does it even cater to other genders?
Well,
You know, there's a lot of argument. Go ahead, Deepika, go ahead.
Yeah, so Sneha, like I said in the beginning, there is no doubt about it that the law stands only for women, and that too completely taking off the point that women of today do have an agency to decide what kind of sexual relationship they want to get into. If they want to have, this law is bizarre. It just basically says that women have absolutely no agency to say no if a man comes and says them they will get married to her, or he will provide her a job, he will provide her a promotion. It's like women are now these absolute mindless people, not even, worse than even children, that they cannot think of betterment for themselves and they would have sex with somebody on such promises. It makes absolutely no sense. And obviously, there are no other genders that are recognized by the law. And still, one more thing, let's understand when we are talking about progressiveness, when we are talking about absolute equality, the law completely fails to recognize that just so many women who are at very senior positions. Is it only a man who has a lust? Women cannot have lust. Women cannot promote, ask a man to have sexual relationship with her by promising him a job. So the law goes against the Article 14 and 15. It is absolutely unconstitutional, unthought of. And Sneha, let me just say, because there's a lot of discussion that has happened on the panel regarding what the courts have said regarding rape and false promise of marriage. In December 2022, Odisha High Court hit the nail on this whole idea of rape and false promise of marriage, is saying that this whole provision needs a serious relook on the rationality of automatic extension of Section 90 of the Indian Penal Code to determine validity of consent for sex and false promise of marriage. Dr. Justice Sanjeev Kumar Panigrahi, while granting bail to a man accused of similar charges in this case, the intention of the law is clear on the issue. The rape laws should not be used to regulate intimate relationships, especially in cases where women have agency and are in a relationship by choice. And Sneha, let me tell you, कितने दिन शादी का झांसा? Can the woman go and say कि मुझे 10 साल के लिए शादी का झांसा दे रहा था? And then you're going to jail the man? On what grounds? Why? Just because they had sex and now the woman thinks that, he owes something to her? It's absolutely bizarre, Sneha. We can just talk about, have debates. Sneha, there have been 4 suicides.
Kapil Madan,
1 month by
Kapil
men
Madan
who are
is
false promise of marriage. There are families that are getting completely shattered. Why? Because there was a breakup. Why? Because the marriage did not happen. Why? Because woman willingly had sex with someone and later on says it was a false promise. Who is there to decide whether it was a promise or not also? Such subjective thought.
We're out of time. Talish Ray, can you just quickly come into what Deepika is saying? Would you agree with what she's saying? Is it as simple as this that a woman would say that, is it as simple as this that a woman can come and say that,
No, it isn't. It isn't. I'm going to repeat this again.
The argument that has been made that, I'm getting out of the relationship, I don't have,
No, it isn't. It isn't.
Please go
Very
ahead.
quickly, it says whoever by deceitful means or making by promise to marry a woman without any intention of fulfilling. So there has to be a promise and there has to be an intention not to fulfill that. So it is not just simply that there is a situationship or a one night stand and it breaks up, because please understand that as we understand in terms of the Urban Dictionary what a situationship is, a one night stand is, or even a relationship which is at a casual level, there is no neither a promise to marry nor is there any intention not to fulfill that marriage. So it doesn't work like that. Having said that, I still feel that this is problematic because it doesn't take into account consent at all. So at that point, because you're not taking into account the consent of the woman, because you are not taking into account the agency of a woman to be able to decide whether she can or cannot, and the very fact that this is only applicable for women because it has to be across genders. And please understand there are other genders that are far more vulnerable as well. So in that sense, and as well as the fact that this is basically talking about a heteronormative definition of marriage, that itself is problematic to a large extent. Please also see that there are currently same-sex couples that are there. They may not have a right to marry. So it is problematic, but not on the basis of that
Which
a
is now
situationship or a date can leave you onto that. Yes, please.
Kapil Madan, you're raising your hands.
Sneha, I will make 2 quick points. One, I have, said earlier, that, what the legislature could have done, they could have made this as a non-cognizable offense wherein police does not have any role. So that means there is no FIR, there is no mechanical arrest. It is only
That's
a
very
concern.
difficult to get, Kapil. That's even very difficult to understand as well in the Indian context, because I don't know how is that possible, frankly.
I'll give you a reason. I'll give you a plausible reason, plausible and a rational reason, because the non-cognizable offenses are, such in which police does not have any role, but these are offenses, which are punishable, wherein the magistrate records the evidence himself. He applies his mind on the evidence available on record, and after satisfying
Can you give us
himself
an
about the
example
commission
of
of
such a
offense.
case?
So in that situation, magistrate takes cognizance, not the police. So that could have been,
Can you give us an example just to understand what you're trying to say?
I'm sorry, I didn't get you.
Can you give us an example of what you're trying to say so we understand that better?
Yes. Now, there are 2 categories of offenses. Now, I'll just give you an example. Defamation law here. In defamation cases, the police does not register an FIR. If you are complaining about defamation, you will need to go to the magistrate. You will have to file complaint, lead evidence, and the magistrate will apply its mind and will decide whether he wants to proceed, whether the offense is made out or not. So you have a higher level of checks and balances before you initiate a prosecution. Now, what happens in matters like this is a woman goes to a police station, says that, there was a promise to marry. There is an FIR immediately upon the statement being made. And in almost all cases, the police goes and arrests the person. Now, what do you do in that kind of a situation? I mean, Deepika is absolutely right. In fact, not only the
Right.
individual, the entire family gets shattered if you have that kind of, prosecution being faced by any of the family members. So that's point number one. The legislature could have
Okay.
made,
Okay.
this as a non-cognizable
Okay, we are
offense.
totally out of time.
I really, very quickly, Kapil made a very, very important point. Just like in 498A, the entire family is used to be trapped, whether sister staying somewhere else. I am personally dealing with cases of rape and false promise of marriage right now, where the father has been implicated, the mother has been implicated, the sister and the brother has been implicated by writing just one line that I went to their house to ask for this marriage, and all of them got together and threw me out of the house. And all of the entire family members have been, implicated in that 376 or rape and false promise of marriage case. With section 69, exactly this is going to happen. So it's not just the man, it's his entire family that's going to be implicated. There will be arrest.
No, I'm sorry. That
Okay.
that is, you see, because
from both the sides by the court. I personally don't see any rationale behind this, and I don't even see what kind of justice is being given, especially to women.
Okay, I'm totally out of time, but Talish Ray, you wanted to respond. Please quickly respond.
Yeah, so when we are talking about section 69 or its precursor in terms of section 90 and section 375 of IPC, it did cover the man, it doesn't cover the family. So I'm not sure how you are drawing that juxtaposition, and I think that becomes a bit of fear mongering. Please don't do that. Please be careful about the statements that you make about an FIR. Please, I'm not Deepika, I'm not getting into the case. I've not studied the case, but what I'm saying is that no, it's not possible. It's not possible for an FIR to be registered against the entire family for
Allow
a
me,
case
Deepika,
of,
you made your point. Talish is also just making her point.
Yeah. So I'm just saying that this is applicable, definitely applicable. There are deep problems within section 69, but no, it doesn't drag in all the others concerned. And we will have to see how that plays out. And the legislature should have given a greater thought in terms of the wording, in terms of what the punishment was. But the fact that the entire family will be drawn in, or the fact that a one-night stand can lead into it, that is fear mongering. That's not what this law is talking about. I'm very sorry, but the law is quite specific in that sense.
Okay.
No, Deepika, let's drop it. Just
Okay.
No,
I'm
Deepika,
sorry, I'm
drop it. It's
totally
not
out of
about
time.
one matter.
Deepika Bhardwaj, Talish Ray, Tehseen Poonawala, who left us a while before, as well as Kapil Madan. Thank you very much, all of you, for joining us. I understand we have disagreements among the panelists, and that's absolutely fine. It's important because this is a complex subject. Not everybody would agree to what they are saying, but thank you very much, all of you, for joining us, for bringing in your very, very important perspectives. It matters a lot, and I'm sure our viewers have been enriched far more.